presenter is my second. We have three daughters and a lot of nieces, so I have to be very careful,
Well, they're all your daughters.
Some of them, they know they are my niece, and some of them, they are my granddaughter. They don't know that. The daughters know, they know they are kind, going around and say, oh, Anyway, the next presenter is Melinda Beers, and I was telling you before that I was thinking that she's a real angel, and one day was, I was already showing, because you wear as a, I am not wear. So anyway, and she's going to have a very nice presentation that we are going to learn a lot. And I know, this is the reason that I say when they are my daughter, when they are challenging me. This became, and some of them are challenging me. I say, do that, and they say, no. And I say, okay. And so this is the reason that
Okay. When we think of the national symbols of Mexico, there are many things which come to mind. Everyone always thinks of the eagle, cactus, and serpent, or the pyramids left behind by ancient cultures. Beyond these symbols, there is one that is more significant than all of the rest, and that is the Virgin of Guadalupe. The Virgin of Guadalupe is a symbol which transcends the differences between ethnic and social classes. She is the patron of the Americas and the mother of Mexico. The story of the Virgin of Guadalupe is one which has been discussed and altered over the centuries. Although the meaning and significance of the story have been changed, the basic story is the same in both the written and oral versions. The story begins with the encounter of an indigenous man and Virgin Mary. According to legend, an indigenous man named Juan Diego was walking over Mount Tepeyac en route to Tlatelolco to hear Mass. While he was walking across the summit, he heard beautiful music, and he thought that he must have been in heaven and the angels were singing. When Juan Diego looked for the origin of the music, he found a beautiful young woman. The young woman told him that she was Mary, the Mother of God, and she asked him to go to Archbishop Zumarraga and ask him to build her a church on Tepeyac. Juan Diego went to the Archbishop, but he was turned away and told to bring proof of the apparition. The next day, Juan Diego did not go to Tepeyac because his uncle was sick and he was trying to find a priest to hear his confession. Juan Diego was also trying to avoid seeing Mary so that he would not have to tell her that he had not been able to fulfill her request. In any case, Mary found Juan Diego and he had to tell her what had happened. The Virgin told him not to worry, and she said, "Am I not your mother? Are you not in my shadow? Don't worry about anything. Don't worry about your uncle. He won't die of this illness. Calm yourself. Your uncle is already cured." Juan Diego then asked Mary for proof which he could take to the Archbishop. Mary told him to go to the top of Tepeyac and pick the flowers that he would find there. Juan Diego was amazed when he got to Tepeyac. Every kind of flower from Spain was there. This was rare because it was the middle of December and nothing should have been blooming. Juan Diego folded his tilma, which is a cape or mantle worn by indigenous men, and he put the flowers inside of it and took them to Archbishop Zumarraga. When Juan Diego arrived at the Archbishop's house, he explained what had happened, and the Archbishop asked him for the proof. Juan Diego then let the flowers fall to the ground, and the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe was left printed on his cape. After this miracle, Juan Diego returned to his house, where he found his uncle cured from his illness. His uncle told him that a young lady had visited and cured him. This is the first healing miracle which the Virgin of Guadalupe performed. The legend of the apparitions follows the European model, but it has some differences. In the European model, a statue or painting is left in the vicinity of the apparition, and this is how the image of the apparition comes to be known. It is also thought that these statues or paintings were made by one of the apostles. The Virgin of Guadalupe is the first and only apparition which has left her image printed on a piece of clothing and which wasn't made by human hands. The most important difference between this apparition and the others is that the Virgin appeared as an indigenous woman instead of looking European. Mary appeared with a dark complexion and with indigenous facial features. Mary appears to be very young and with child. There has always been controversy about the origin of the name of the Virgin of Guadalupe. Some scholars feel that the name originates in Spain. This is due to the apparitions of another Virgin of Guadalupe, which took place in Extremadura, Spain. Other scholars believe that there was a misunderstanding over the Virgin's name and that her name was originally in Nahua, which was the most common indigenous language at the time. According to this theory, the most probable name would have been Cuatlasupe. This means she who steps on the serpent. The word is broken down into 3 parts. Coa means serpent, Tla is the article she, and Supe means steps on. The first book about the apparitions of the Virgin of Guadalupe was published in 1648. Although the apparitions were mentioned in other documents, this was the first written account in which the author and the exact date of the publication were known. Father Miguel Sanchez wrote this book, and the title was Imagen de la Virgen María, Madre de Dios de Guadalupe, milagrosamente aparecida en la Ciudad de México. This book included a recounting of the apparitions along with an explanation of the processions done in honor of the Virgin. It also told stories of miracles which the Virgin had performed. This book had a nationalistic feeling which was directed towards the Creole community. The book emphasized that the Virgin was Creole in nature because she had links to Spain, although she appeared in Mexico. This publication also focused on the idea that Mary had helped the conquistadors in their struggle for Mexico and that now she was helping the Catholic Church to convert the indigenous people to Catholicism. From these themes, we can see that the Virgin of Guadalupe was very important to the Creole community and that she was someone in whom they could find respect and confidence. In 1649, 6 months after the publication of Father Sanchez's book, another book about the apparitions was published. This book was written by Father Luis Lasso de la Vega and was entitled Ue Tlamahuicoltica. This version of the story is written in Nahua. The writing style in this book is poetic, which was the style seen in indigenous writings. The most important part of this book is called the Nican Mopohua, which means here it is recounted. In this section, the story of the apparitions is told poetically with a lot of emphasis on the beauty of nature. The manner in which Juan Diego and Mary speak to each other is much more affectionate and without formalities. These differences in style show us that the book was written specifically for the indigenous community. The fact that this book was written by a Creole priest in an indigenous style shows us that the indigenous community was not the first group devoted to the Virgin and that they learned of the apparitions through the Catholic Church and the Creole community. The story of the apparitions has a great importance for the indigenous community because the Virgin appeared to an indigenous man who had recently converted to Catholicism. This gave the indigenous community the opportunity to have someone with whom they could identify within the Catholic Church. We can see that because of the apparitions, the Creole and indigenous communities became devoted to the Virgin of Guadalupe. The event that unified these two communities was the use of the Virgin of Guadalupe as the standard of the Mexican army during the War for Mexican Independence. In September of 1810, Father Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla gave the famous shout of Dolores. He called to the Mexican community to fight against the Spanish crown for their independence. Father Hidalgo adopted the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe as the symbol for their struggle. The Spaniards chose the Virgin of Remedies as their symbol and patroness during the war. This Virgin was very important to them because she had helped the conquistadores during the conquest of Mexico. According to legend, when the Spaniards tried to gain control of the Aztec capital, some indigenous people claimed to have seen the Virgin of Remedies throwing sand into the eyes of indigenous warriors. This situation caused the Virgin of Remedies to be called the Gachupina and the Virgin of Guadalupe to be called the Criolla. During the war, both armies dressed up statues of the Virgins as warriors and prayed to them for help and support. The use of the Virgin of Guadalupe as the symbol for Mexican independence was the best decision that could have been made. Mexico won their independence and their identity as the children of as the children of the Virgin of Guadalupe. In conclusion, the apparitions of the Virgin of Guadalupe impacted Mexican culture in 2 significant ways. The Virgin helped unify the Creole and indigenous communities, thereby helping them to gain their independence from Spain. The second way in which Mary impacted Mexican culture were the details that are unique in this apparition when compared to the others throughout the world. Never before had an image of Mary been printed on clothing and not been made by human hands. These details separate Mexico from the other countries in which Mary has appeared, and therefore she is the mother and national symbol of Mexico.
Any question? Thank you.
Does the Virgin of Guadalupe have a particular personal significance to you?
Well, originally I started this project because I'm very interested in the syncretism between Aztec religion and Catholic religion in Mexico. Unfortunately, I couldn't focus on that because there's no historical background for that and there's no concrete literature written on that. So I decided to take a figure that falls into that category and research it. However, through my research, somehow she's managed to find her way into my life, and so now there's no escaping it. So yeah, now she does, but at the beginning it wasn't for that.
It's been suggested over time that La Virgen de Guadalupe is really a figment of Spanish creation to only to use as conversion for the indigenous people. Did you find that in your...
I did find that, again, there is no concrete evidence of that, obviously, because if that did happen, the church wasn't going to document it, and the indigenous people were incapable of making any concrete documentation. That's a strong theory, and it's one that I wanted to include in my report, but I didn't feel that I could without any concrete background. However, I do think that there's truth to the idea that they used it to convert the indigenous community, but there is too much surrounding the image to think that it was made up.
How about contemporarily, after 1810? Did you do any...
No. 1810 was enough.
You know what I say that? One of the things that is very interesting that, you know, in Cuba, the Madonna, the national Madonna, at the beginning had three men, and they were one Indian, one white, and one black. And you know, because the Indian was exterminated, they changed, you know, to one mulatto, one white, and one black. And it's very interesting to see that, you know, through the story, Diego has not changed. But one of my always thinking, you know, is why all this Madonna at the beginning, you know, appear only to men. And this is something that, you know, is always bothering me, you know. I don't know. But this is, you know, you cannot see the change through the history, but I can see how the portrayal of the Madonna in Cuba has changed through the years, you know, the appearance of the people.
Oh,
That's a book by Gloria and Sandua. She explained a book called Borderlands, and she explained a little bit about the concept of the Virgin de Guadalupe and how apparently it appeared on top of one of the oldest, one of the figures of the people, Donanza. So they have like 4 different, like she was explaining before, the roles of the woman. They were to be a mother, to express herself as a mother in the religious way, or as a prostitute, not as a prostitute, but just like being able to live her sexual life to one. And there were like 4 different components of this concept. And then the Catholic Church took the figure of the mother, and that's the one they forward.
Yeah, that's part of the syncretism between the Aztec religion and the Catholic religion, is that she did appear on a site that was previously an Aztec temple to their mother goddess. And that is part of the theory, in that if the Spaniards did make it up and try to use it to convert the indigenous, they did their homework, because that was the perfect place for it to happen, because that was the only way that they could get them to change from going there to worship their goddess to going there to worship the Virgin of Guadalupe.
Also, just my attention, the standard bearer for the movement of independence, of course, La Virgen de Guadalupe, but the standard bearer for the migrant farmers in 1960.
Yeah, no, she continues to be the symbol for most Mexican or Mexican-American struggles, just because I think really winning the war for independence with her use as the standard, really set that as the benchmark, and she's just always been the one that they use for symbolism.
One of the challenges I found in this was trying, work her, is the image of the Guadalupe in movies. And this, why I say, she say no. And because you have two big figures in the Mexican movie, where is Maria Peri, Dolores del Rio. And Dolores del Rio always was, representing the Indian women. And Maria Peri was representing only the middle class, the power for, the Amazon and everything. And he said, why you don't, go to the movie? And she said, no. So, and my students say, a good mentor listen and say, that's it, and I back up. Okay, thank you, Melinda.